All right, let's get right into it. When you and I think of King David, what comes to mind? Probably the shepherd boy, the slingshot, the giant, or maybe the noble king writing psalms. But the story of how he actually became king, well, that's a whole different ballgame. It's a raw, complicated story of political maneuvering, a brutal civil war, and a lot of morally gray choices. This is not a fairy tale. It's a political thriller straight out of 2 Samuel.
So let's just drop you right into the middle of the action. Imagine you're David. For years, you've been on the run, hunted by your greatest rival, King Saul, the man who wants you dead. And now you get the news. He's finally fallen in battle. The throne's right there. It's yours for the taking. So what's your first move? Do you pop the champagne, throw a massive party? Well, let's see how David handles it.
Okay, so the first thing that happens is a messenger, an Amalekite guy, comes running to David. And he's got what looks like a classic case of ancient fake news. He presents David with Saul's crown and bracelet and spins this whole story about how he heroically mercy-killed the wounded king. Now he's probably thinking, David's going to love this. I'm going to get a huge reward. But his story directly contradicts what the narrator told us just a chapter before, that Saul took his own life. So this guy is clearly just trying to get on the good side of the new man in charge. Now here's where the story takes a hard left turn. David's reaction, it completely shatters everyone's expectations. The messengers, and probably ours too. There's no celebration, not even a sigh of relief. Instead, we see something totally unexpected. Instead of glee, there is just profound grief. David and all his men tear their clothes. They start mourning and weeping and fasting. And this isn't just for show. The text uses 3 different words for grief, which, as scholars point out, is the only place in the entire Old Testament where all 3 are used together like this. This shows you that for David, this wasn't a personal win. This was a national tragedy. The king was dead, his best friend Jonathan was dead, the army was crushed, the whole nation had been humiliated.
And what about that messenger who was hoping for a big promotion? Yeah, he gets an execution. David's logic is just ice cold, and it reveals a core principle of his. He says, your own mouth testified against you. In David's mind, Saul wasn't just a rival king. He was the Lord's anointed. And this guy, by his own admission, dared to strike him down. It's a powerful statement about David's respect for the office of the king, even when his worst enemy was the one sitting on the throne.
David then writes this incredibly moving poem, a lament. And this one line right here, it tells you everything about where his head is at. He's basically saying, whatever you do, do not let our enemies, the Philistines, hear about this. Don't give them a reason to celebrate our failure. His entire focus is on the honor of the nation, not his own personal power grab. His grief for Saul's son Jonathan is especially raw. He says their bond was more wonderful than that of women. Now let's be super clear here. As scholars like Dr. Chisholm explain, this isn't about romantic love as we think of it. This was covenantal love, a bond built on loyalty, deep allegiance, and a profound friendship that, in David's world, was a much more powerful and unique force than any romantic relationship he'd ever known. So you'd think, okay, Saul's dead, David's king now, right? Story over? Nope, not even close. Saul's death doesn't lead to a peaceful transition of power. Instead, it tears the kingdom in half and ignites a long, brutal civil war. The path to the throne is, quite literally, paved in blood.
And here's the breakdown. You've basically got 2 rival houses. David is quickly crowned king by his own tribe, Judah, in the south. He sets up shop in the city of Hebron. But up north, Saul's top general, a guy named Abner, props up Saul's last surviving son, Ishbosheth, as the king of the rest of Israel. So the nation is now officially at war with itself.
And we're not talking about a quick conflict here. This painful, bloody civil war dragged on for 7.5 years. So David's journey to unify the kingdom, it was a long, violent, and messy marathon.
And if you want a picture of just how fierce and bitter this war was, get this. The 2 armies meet, and they decide to stage a contest, a battle of champions, 12 guys from each side. But what happens is, each man grabs his opponent's head and shoves a sword into his side, and all 24 of them fall down dead at the exact same time. It's this perfectly pointless, horrifying draw that just shows you the sheer brutality of the conflict.
So how does this war finally end? Is there a big, decisive battle? No. It ends through a series of assassinations, backroom deals, and some really questionable political maneuvering. This is where the story gets super complicated, and honestly, pretty dark.
And while all this is going on, we start to see the first cracks appear in David's own character. The text makes a point of telling us that while he's in Hebron, he takes on more wives, bringing his total to 6. He's starting to look less like God's chosen one and more like a typical ancient king, building up a harem for political power, the very thing the law in Deuteronomy warned Israel's kings not to do.
The huge turning point comes from Abner, the commander of Saul's army. His own king, this guy Ishbosheth, accuses him of sleeping with one of Saul's former concubines, which in that culture was basically seen as a power play for the throne. Abner is absolutely enraged by this insult to his honor, and in a fit of fury he says, "That's it, I'm done." He decides to defect and hand the entire northern kingdom over to David on a silver platter.
So Abner and David cut a deal. A peace treaty is made. It seriously looks like the civil war is finally over, and the kingdom's going to be unified without any more bloodshed. But just as Abner is leaving David's camp, David's own general, his ruthless nephew Joab, shows up, fresh from a raid, and he is about to blow the whole thing up. And what Joab does next leads to what many commentators see as a defining moment in David's reign. It's one of his first and maybe his most significant failures as king. And it has nothing to do with fighting an enemy. It's all about how he handles a crime committed by his own inner circle.
So just think back to the Amalekite messenger. He claimed he killed David's enemy, and David had him executed on the spot for it. Now you have Joab, David's own nephew, who murders Abner, a new political ally who is under a peace treaty in cold-blooded revenge. And David's verdict? A public curse, but no actual punishment. Nothing.
Instead of delivering justice, David launches what is basically a masterful PR campaign. He goes to incredible lengths to show everyone he had nothing to do with it. He publicly curses Joab, he forces Joab to rip his clothes and mourn, he leads the state funeral himself, he writes another lament poem, and he fasts in public. It's all politically brilliant, but it's not justice.
And here's David's own excuse in his own words. He actually says, "These sons of Zeruiah," meaning his nephews, Joab and his brother, "are too strong for me." Think about that. The king, whose number one job is to bring justice to the land, is basically admitting that his own lieutenants are too powerful for him to control. It's a shocking admission of weakness, and it's a failure that's going to have disastrous consequences for him and his family down the road.
So this whole bloody, complicated story leaves us with a really crucial takeaway, and it boils down to this timeless question. It's a question for any leader in any era. When is it your duty to enforce justice, especially when it means punishing your own powerful, loyal supporters? David fails the test here, and it's something to really think about.